Welcome, everyone, to episode 10 of In the Hot Seat. For those that are repeat viewers, thanks for coming back. And if you're new to the show, every 2 weeks or so, we put an industry expert, a customer, somebody of interest in the hot seat for lively discussion, some debate, we hope, some discourse, and try to humanize a digital experience. We're going to look at all aspects of the customer lifecycle, and we look at the technologies that underpin those through each part of the journey. And I'm not sure I still need to do this, but I will just in case. If you're on LinkedIn and you're streaming live and you have a glitch, you can go to the YouTube or Facebook stream, and that will solve it. Some people still have an issue with it looping around. So, and this this episode. This episode's the second in the sales series, the enterprise sales series. And then excuse me, excuse me. And we'll take a look at today. We're going to take a look at the seller buyer gap and some interesting information around that. And then we're going to dive in and have a bit of discussion with a guest that I'm really excited to bring on in a few minutes. I want to put this up, Steve, first, and I'll stop rambling on and we can chat about this for a minute. But so this was a diagram, a chart that I made a little while ago when I was working with a client around this idea that seller buyer gap has gotten increasingly worse, and that we're starting to see a lot of issues around sales. And so this was to illustrate some of those gaps, but just as a backdrop to that too, interesting data that'll back this up. So in Forbes, they said that 53% of sales reps made their quotas last year. 53%. That's not very good. 61% of salespeople consider selling harder, much harder than just 5 years ago. That's from the Sales Insights Lab. And then in a study that I've done repeatedly since 2015, and when I was at G2 as the chief research officer, I turned that over there, and they're still doing it. But the last survey I ran last year, 68% of the respondents said they contacted a salesperson only after they made the decision to buy, which is kind of stark, I think. Anyway, so Steve, any thoughts about this? I know you took a look at this the other day. So,
yes, well, the impact seems to be principally internal. That is, one of the questions I have is, how does this affect the customer's experience in a direct way, or is that effect indirect? The other thing is, I think the other night you gave a great illustration from your own experience that I hope you'll bring up again in tying it to the customer, the customer journey as mapped out as opposed to as actually practiced by customers, which I think is an interesting distinction, because that gets into the point at which the sales rep is contacted. And one of the issues is obviously transparent pricing. And clearly we're seeing this in a number of industries. And that's okay. I want to try to lure you into buying the product, but I'm not really transparent about, hey, this is what I would like for you to buy, whether it's B2B or B2C.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And you know, it's interesting, the underlying to this, the underpinning, I think, really is this idea that sellers are still looking at this as a straight line journey, a linear journey for a customer. And when they design a customer journey map or whatever whatever tool they call it, they basically have the idea that the customer does these activities in a certain order and in the way they want them to, frankly. And unfortunately, the seller never got the map, the buyer never got the map. And so the buyer's doing this nonlinear process that really is dependent on the internet and connectivity and, all the social networks, all the other things that we have now. And they don't behave in the way that they might have behaved if they ever did in before. And your point and my example, I know, was around transparent pricing. And this one's one that really bothers me a lot. And you'll see a lot of technology vendors have gone to a model where they at least put most of the pricing out there. And don't get me wrong, there are certainly complexities that don't need to be transparent because it's just too hard to come up with it. But in general, the story I told was I was doing some translations on a survey, and I was looking for a translation vendor. And so I went to my old employer, G2, and I said, hey, let me see on this listing of translation services, which is number one. Number one, went to their website, spent about 2 minutes going to the pricing page and got a big old, please call us for pricing. Not really what I wanted. So I went to number two and I got exactly the same thing. So I was starting to get a little worried, and I went to number three. They had transparent pricing. They had online transaction. It was all self-service. Literally did the deal, paid them, got the translations in less than 24 hours. So that transparency was a buy decision for me. That made the decision for me.
Well, one of the things that we've seen in academia for years, I mean, as a professor, where I look at management theory is often this series of boxes and lines. Yeah. And one of the things I've always tried to describe to my students is the series of boxes and lines is a very, very limited model. And consequently, trust me, it's a lot messier than that. And you're going to take 2 steps forward and 3 steps back in order to get through it. And companies seem to be trying to put this, here's the line you're supposed to follow, when the customers are going,
They just do what they want. I mean, you can't manage them, right? They just don't do what you want them to do. Anyway, I guess that's a good setup for this anyway. But let's bring the guest on and we can just have a little conversation around this, because like I said, I'm excited about this one. Steve, you want to do the intro?
Yes, we have Jon Flynn, who is the sports nerd for Microsoft. Jon has extensive experience in work, and we were joking with him a little bit earlier about how do you be a standout nerd at Microsoft. Given his extensive experience in working with sporting events, but also with interacting and having to sell Microsoft services to the people who are going to incorporate Microsoft in a very complex ways. So I suspect you can't click on the pricing there. But
yeah, probably not.
Probably not.
Not for the details, right?
But he's got some very exciting background related to a wide variety of sports. We were picking on him about his guitars and other things like that earlier. But rather than me talk about him too much, let's let him come on and tell us what's going on.
Welcome, Jon.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. We really appreciate it. And I think that Steve did a pretty good job there, Mr. Microsoft Sports Nerd. But I guess we can call you that, right? That's kind of
absolutely
title. So you heard a little bit of that setup, I'm sure, and I know chatted a little bit backstage to get this kind of kicked off. But I just love to hear from your perspective, tying around this idea. Journeys and customers, are they predictable? Are they not? How do enterprise buyers buy? I mean, what are you seeing from a Microsoft world?
I think I like the phrase that you used earlier, this linear journey, right? I mean, it's not a linear journey. So the problem is with journeys is that everyone has one, right? But not everyone is on everyone else's journey. And I think if we look at a seller's journey versus a buyer's journey, they're two very different things. And I think that is the problem, right? And I love the graphic that you put up about that gap. And there is a gap. And I think the gap is primarily because there's two different outcomes, right? A seller is, at the bare bones of it, required to sell something or move something forward that results in a revenue opportunity for the company that they represent. A buyer's journey is to acquire something that's going to help them and their cause and their company move forward. And in between is this little value proposition that people kind of just forget about, right? So if you're a seller, how are you measured? You're measured on selling. You're measured on what you can do for the company that you represent, the product line that you are responsible for. You're not responsible for making the customer successful, because that isn't factored into your quota, or that isn't factored into your success plan, or whatever the case may be. So I think of it as a behavioral thing, right? If you are managed on selling something, you're going to sell something, right? And you look at the stats that you just brought out, a lot of the buyers don't want to be sold to. They don't want to buy something from someone. They want to engage in conversation. They want to be able to make an informed decision. They want to be able to find all the good and bad that they can. And this is before speaking to anybody who represents anything that could possibly cure the itch that they have. And then once they've been able to have this internal, and it could be through many internal stakeholders and friends and family, etc. But once they've got this idea of what it is they want and how it is that they can go and get it, then they'll start reaching out, to your point, look for pricing or look for implementation partners or something like that, because they've already made that decision. Now enter the seller into this part. The seller's at the beginning of their journey, but the buyer's at the end of theirs. So there's already a mismatch. Left goes right and right goes left at that point. So I love the way that you frame it with that buyer-seller gap. And I think one of the coolest things about it is that the people and companies who get that gap ultimately are the most successful because they understand to play in between those lines.
Yeah, that's interesting. The one thing you mentioned in there that I think is interesting, and I've dug into a little bit, but probably not as much as I should, and that's this idea of misaligned goals and compensation.
Right.
And I mean, obviously, we know the customer's trying to solve a problem, but it's interesting to think that what is it we really are paying those salespeople to do? And we always go like, well, we're paying them to sell, right? I mean, that's what we want them to do. But in fact, that may be not exactly the way to think of it. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think that is a good call out.
How would you characterize your relationship with some of your large customers?
Yeah. Sure, it's a good question, and the answer to that shouldn't be complex, right? Because if you have a complex relationship, then you're going to have to do a lot of things in order to prove that you're providing value, right? So I like to look at my relationship with a lot of the customers that I have that are large and deep across Microsoft stack. We have a great deal of products, right? That go from cloud still to on-prem to productivity to XYZ, right? Think about it. We could probably get you there either in a first or third party fashion. And the ones that take advantage of a wide swath of what we have to offer, either from a first or third party, have complex needs. But acquiring the underlying technology to meet those complex needs shouldn't be complex itself. Because, Michael, to your point earlier, you went to number 3 on the list and said, great, I can get all the checkpoints I want. I'm choosing you. That was your decision, right? That wasn't the seller's decision, right? The sellers at the company 1 and 2, they're going, oh, man, well, I'd love to be able to have transparent pricing, or I'd love to be able to tell you what this is going to cost down to the finite detail. That may not be up to them. That may be somebody other than them making that decision for them, right? So the seller's really at 2 odds here, right? Don't be complex as a role, to your point, Steve, but also try and help the company they represent not act in a complex fashion. So for Microsoft, we do transparent pricing for our cloud products, right? There's literally a pricing calculator that you can go in. Now, knowing what you want is what you need to be able to do to put that in there, and you don't know what you don't know. So that's when nerds like me come in and go, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? So in a roundabout way, answering your question is getting to that place at the table where they trust you to help them build something, where they trust you to help them get to that end goal, versus they're going, all right, what's Flynn selling me today, right? That would be awful. I don't ever want to sell anybody anything. I'd love to be on a journey with them where they go, you know what? I like the way you approach this. Let me jump on this value train with you and see if we can get there together, right? Because if you maintain that relationship, I think you're going to be very successful.
This actually sounds like consultant with portfolio.
I don't think there is a world where you see selling without consulting. Right? Because if you think about the profession of selling, right, the sellers have gone from holding we're ringing the doorbell and we have a vacuum cleaner or encyclopedia. We hold all the cards. We have something you want. If you want it from somewhere else, you can't get it. It's me and me only, right? I have all the value. So now the buyer's made the decision before they call me. They have a way of working. There are multiple ways to get to point A. Are you going to choose me, or is there a combination of me? And the seller's now at a point where I have to be consultative, not only to myself, because I might not be the best solution, and say that first, because that's going to get you credibility, right? But how do I get there with this customer so that we can talk about the next thing and then the next thing, because I've earned that position.
Well, it's underneath that. I think there's something that we should bring out a little bit too that definitely interests me, and I've looked at for a bit now, and that's this idea that the sellers is more of a trusted advisor role, that you're trying to build the relationship and understand the customer to the point that you can make recommendations and help them solve their problem, even if they come in with a determined solution set that they think is going to work. It's still your job to go, yeah, well, this is great, but this piece you don't really have. You need to do this or whatever. And if you build that kind of trust, that it seems like that is the real switch in bringing them, to you. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
Do you think selling's harder now? I mean, you heard my stat at the front, and I know a lot of sales leaders say that, but do you think enterprise sales is harder?
It's a loaded question, really, my guy. So my first reaction to that is no. I don't think it is, right? In fact, I think it's got easier. Maybe, Steve, to your point of it being more consultative in its approach now, right? Because I think enterprise selling, or just take selling in general, right? Selling has become a partnership game, right? And as a seller, it's not just me either. There's a whole swath of characters behind me that provide the value and the gaps. And there's that saying, right? If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. Go find a different room, right? So it's cool walking in there and learning, because one of the nicest things about being a seller, if the customer, to get to that trusted advisor state, right? Being a customer, having enough faith in me to tell me what their problem is and how we can start solutioning this together, that gets us to that end goal, right? So I don't think it's harder, to answer your question. I think it's very, very different. It's not as clear cut now, because the lines have blurred between who provides the most value. Is it the buyer knowing what they want right off the bat, or is it you coming in and trying to infer your value to nudge their decision in a way in your favor?
And in developing they may be simple relationships at some level, but they're complex relationships at another one. And particularly when you're talking about the relationships between enterprises, you may have a very simple, very good relationship with a key contact person at one of the sports teams or with whom you work, and it may be easy to add something. If you become the first person they look to say, okay, we have a need for some kind of software here, they may ask you first, simply because they have a relationship with you. I think Pete just put up a comment to the effect of, it's hard to break in from the outside looking in. That particular comment. So you have this relationship, they're going to ask you first, have you ever said, well, we don't do that, but I can tell you who does and does it well?
Yeah, all the time. And I think that's part of the value, right? Is that why would I call you when I have a quote unquote problem, right? But people don't talk to me because they need something from Microsoft only, right? They'll talk to me because I saw this and I think that is amazing. How do we do that? I'm like, that's great. Call my friend Mary. She's absolutely the perfect person to do that, right? There may be a competitor, they may work with us, there may be a partner, or it may be internal to us. But the fact of having that relationship is that trust is a two-way avenue. It's a two-way street, right? So you have to be able to trust them enough that you're giving them a recommendation that may not actually impact your business firsthand this time around. But if you think about the bigger picture, understanding your customer's business, that, okay, if they call Mary and they're able to activate this type of value for them, there's some ancillary stuff that I can help them with, but I don't open that door unless they get the help from Mary. So I think a lot of the sellers, right, if they are immature, or if they aren't mature enough to look outside of the immediate, it's not in my bag, I don't care about it, you're going to see your sales be a little bit more successful when you take a more consultative approach, not only with the customer themselves, but with the partners that you have in the field as well. And also, look, your enemy today could be your best friend tomorrow, right?
Yeah. I mean, it seems to me too that that plays dead center into the trust idea that, if you're actually helping me, really helping me, and you become an advisor, you're not just, and so my feeling is, well, you're just not in it just for the to close that deal no matter what. And I wonder too, like in the world of subscription services, which most of us are playing in some way or another now. I mean, is that added to that? I mean, how does that sort of play into the fact that you've got this kind of ongoing or need to have an ongoing relationship?
It's certainly put a more focus on it, because if you are a cloud vendor such as we are, right, we earn your business every 30 days, right? Because that's when you get your invoice for what you've used, and there's no contracts anymore, right? It's a consumption business. You don't like what you're getting, don't use it. You don't use it, the utility bill doesn't rack up, right? So we've shifted to that. Give me huge amounts of money, and I'll give you a couple of years for you to go run amok and do whatever you want, and then I'll come talk to you later. It's that perpetual relationship building that we have now, right? But I think the subscription world, or the subscription economy, I think CA is the one who did that a while ago, right? They called it the subscription economy. It's opened up a beautiful way of creating relationships outside of what you're responsible for, right? Because if you look at the ancillary benefits of, if you subscribe to my cloud platform, anything that runs on my cloud platform is going to be ultimately beneficial to me. So who else can we get into the room? Who else can we bring to ideate and lean in and build these solutions that normally were, hey, I don't do that, that's not my thing. That's taken that away. So for a buyer, that's amazing, right? You've almost single-handedly broken down these walls when you move from perpetuity licensing down to subscription base, because you've widened the playing field for yourself.
And looking at this, it seems like, and of course, it seems to help you that you are, well, Microsoft after all. That the brand recognition can't hurt in that situation, especially in enterprise sales at that level. But that these customers are looking at you as not just a Microsoft person, but as industry expert.
Yeah.
And as the contact point then. Does that reduce this gap that we're talking about? That is, does that close it?
That's a great question, Stephen. And I think that ultimately the answer is yes, right? Because we have Microsoft as that door opener, if you would. The beautiful thing about Microsoft is we play across a lot of industries, and we play very deep inside those industries as well. So whether you're talking to a titan from industry who's been around as long as we have, or maybe longer, or someone who's just starting out, we bring this level of expertise that we've learned, that we've got the lumps on, that we've made mistakes and we've learned how to avoid them before. So I think it certainly, being Microsoft, opens the door for you, but it brings that level of comfort that this isn't our first rodeo, that you're not the only person we're talking to about this. So we do have other viewpoints based upon your peer organizations, competitive or not competitive, that we are doing this for multiple people, that you have the strength of the Microsoft brand vis-a-vis the scale that we have as well. So we're not just a sort of a fly-by-night, do this or we're all out of business tomorrow kind of thing.
So one of the other, and this shifts gear just a tiny bit, but I'm curious what you think about this. So I saw recently a survey from the Bridge Group that said that sales turnover rate was about 34%, but 1 in 10 companies now are seeing attrition up to almost 55%. And we know it takes 6-ish months to find a new sales rep and 6 to 9 months to get them ramped. And if that puts the turnover at roughly 18 months or so, you're not getting a ton of productivity there. Plus, frankly, the skills are not that simple. You've been doing this a while. I mean, you have this discovery skill kind of now built into the way you think about things. That's not necessarily the way people come into this. So, I mean, how do you get the new people in there and bring them up to speed?
It's a great question, and I think if anyone had the singular answer to that, they'd be incredibly successful, right? But if you think about attrition, right, so if you think about regrettable attrition, and we lose some good folks, and we go, well, why did that happen, right? And this is a personal belief of mine. I've long believed that we hire people to sell what we do and sell how we do it, but we don't measure them on the success that they have from the customer's viewpoint, right? So there's a difference there. Then we hire people who are really, really good at selling. And what do we make them do? We make them become professional data entry people, right? Because they have to update systems saying, this is what I'm doing. These are the phone calls that I did X, Y, Z. And that gets reported up. And then we complain about, well, they're really good, but they're not hitting their numbers, or they're hitting their numbers and they're really not representing it in the tools that we have, for example, right? So I think a lot of regretful attrition happens when we don't match the role to the skill we're hiring for. So we think we're hiring salespeople, but maybe we're hiring technical salespeople whose real skill or superpower is going in there and making someone feel comfortable that using this technology isn't going to get them fired. It isn't going to back them into a corner that if they wanted to make a change, they can't, because now they're stuck to a certain language. They're stuck to a certain operating system or X, Y, Z, right? Or you don't choose the difference between being a salesperson who is digitally oriented. That means someone who picks up the phone, who goes on a Teams or Zoom or sells over Slack or something like that, for someone who's in person with someone, because those are very, very different skill sets. Those are different ways of working that I think get lumped into this, oh, you're a seller. Well, what type of seller?
We did some research just a couple of years ago where we were following route salespeople with stopwatches and following them around and assessing how much time they actually spent selling. And it was a very small percentage of the time. That is, most of the time they were fiddling with product or doing other things that could easily be done by someone who was not a sales rep. And but in the environment we're in now, and particularly in this tech environment, it's kind of hard to say, okay, I'm going to have a tech person do this for me when I'm the one who actually has the information.
Yep.
So you end up on the keyboard when you would like to be on a Zoom call with a customer or maybe in person with a customer. Is that?
No, I was going to say, we did an episode the first episode of this series was actually about data quality and data and the fact that, garbage in, garbage out at this stage, because there is so much administrative work. And I think I saw a number recently, like 25% of a salesperson's time is the only amount of time they actually spend selling, that they're doing 75, 80% of their time is spent doing other stuff, right?
Correct. I mean, I think those are all accurate. And I think the way in which sellers report their activity is also maybe a cause of the problem as well. Because if you think about that 25% of the time that they have to sell, and I think that's probably accurate, right? If you think about that 25% that they have, it's usually fictitiously put in the middle of the week. Right, so they'll say, well, Mondays you set the table. This is how we're going to organize the week, right? And your Friday is, well, tell us how that week went. Then you've got Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. There's all of a sudden there's training that needs to be done, and there's internal meetings, and then there's meetings about meetings, and then there's a report. Do we like this report? Not like that report? Then when do we actually get to do the job? You do the job, and then you have to tell someone historically what you did. Now that someone could be anyone, right? Because there's a single data entry. And that'll spew a report for HR, it'll spew a report for finance, it'll spew a report for sales management, for procurement, so on and so forth, right? But you only get to put in one set of data. And the data field that you miss, or that you misrepresent, underrepresent, or overrepresent means different things to other people. So you can have people saying, Jon Flynn, he's pretty good. He's pretty good. Look at him. And then you have the other department going, what do you mean? He's awful. He hasn't done these 5 things like ever, right? So then that comes back to the salesperson. Like, well, hold on a minute. Okay, now I have to be more prescriptive about what I do. So that 25% now has become 20% selling, because I've taken another 5% to be very verbose and show how great I am over here. And then I get dinged because, well, your notes are great, but your pipeline is shrinking or your close rate shrinking. Like, well, hold on, let me get a little bit more. Then the vicious circle comes around, right? Now I'm going to spend more time out in the field, but they're unqualified meetings because I didn't spend the time to qualify them, but I'm in the field. That's what you wanted me to do, right? So I think the danger here is organizations, they pull on pressure points that a report tells them. And the salesperson isn't a reporter. The salesperson is a person that goes through hot streaks, cold streaks, has good days, bad days, and personal lives, right? And if you figure out a way to capture how a salesperson is acting in real time and report on that, I think is the nirvana state where you get, now I know where the gaps are. Now I know how to bring a supporting cast of characters for them, how to report on them or tell them where their weaknesses lay. And again, if we figure that out, let me know, because I'm certainly going to be interested in that. But I think there's also not only a buyer seller gap, I think there's a seller efficacy gap on how we report that.
I mean, to me, it seems like it's that old sort of issue around software that's made to manage and software that's actually made to help you be more productive.
Yeah.
And if you're spending all your time putting data into something that doesn't really do anything but get you in more trouble, or keep somebody off your back if you put the right thing in,
Exactly.
You have to wonder, are you incenting them to not put the right thing in? Because, interesting.
That sounded like good stuff and you still get in trouble.
Yeah, well,
yeah.
the truth can get you in trouble. That's for certain. I know.
Indeed.
Hey, we had a couple of questions from the audience. Could we bring Christy's question up? And there we go. So how much should a sales rep be involved after the sale, and how long after the sale?
So Christy, thanks for that question. It's a good one, right? I mean, when is the sale complete, right? So, I mean, think about after the sale, that infers that there's actually an end date to a sale, right? I think the good rule of thumb that I've used, and it's certainly open for debate, is that when you sell something, that's really when the work starts, right? Because that's when you have to prove value on something that has translated itself into revenue, right? Revenue for your company that you're representing. Okay, now where's the value? Whether it's a subscription or non-subscription sale that you've made, you want to make another one. You want to increase it. You want to grow, right? So your real work now is proving that they made the right decision by going with you. So I don't think there is an after sale. I think there's a stage probably as an after sale, but it's not an event. And how long after the sale, that part of your question, I think that becomes the beginning of the next sale, right? So that after becomes the start again. And that it's that perpetual life cycle that not only builds revenue opportunities, but also builds that relationship and that, as Michael said earlier, that trusted advisor piece, because you haven't just dropped something off, rang the doorbell and said, good luck, thanks for the sale, and away you go to spend your commission check.
I mean, it seems like too that that we're that things have shifted some here, and I know a lot of SaaS companies, cloud companies have gone to this model where they have kind of an old school sales guy out doing the hunting, and then they sort of turn that over to a different organization that is, I don't know, customer success or whatever the right word might be, and it seems like you're suggesting that perhaps the relationship that you build, if you keep it consistent through the relationship and through the whole time you're engaged with them, you actually reap more out of that than you would if there is this hunter gatherer mentality.
The name we used to use for that was the missionary sales rep. The idea that you were going out and you were going into uncharted territory to try to find new customers. And that job may not have changed. It's just not that common anymore. Where when is the sale over? When you're on a subscription and it's not a contract.
Right. I think that is true. And then I think as well, so I love customer success that you brought that up, right? Because that's, I think, is a integral part to the continuation of that value chain, right? And by no means would I suggest that you single thread this, right? So for me, if I'm with a customer who's converted and I've activated to become a potential customer into a customer, I stay with them, but you introduce that cast of characters that support you at every level that you're at. You shouldn't be the only person that's interfacing with them from your organization, no matter the size of your organization, right? Because then you're that single point of failure, and that's not a great thing to do.
Yeah,
Mhm.
no, that makes sense. I mean, it's this team effect that keeps the relationship from the seller, but from the sales rep. But then also you have other people that make sure they see the value out of it and continue to see the value out of it. So you can, yeah, that's great.
Is it-
Um,
is in fact the system set up to help the organization avoid what I would call the hairstylist problem? Which is to say, if the sales rep leaves, do the customers follow or do they stay with the company? If you have more than one point of contact, then you're more likely to stay with the company. If you're loyal to the stylist, as it were, to the sales rep, then if the sales rep moves, so do you. Um,
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I think that's fair. I think that's very accurate, right? So, I mean, we have all, most of us have examples of where you move within industry or move to a new industry, for example, and you always have your contacts that you have, but you can bring conversations with you, but you had to have provided enough value for the for the brand or the organization that you represent that they don't come with you, right? Because they have that support there. I think it's a good hairstylist. I'm going to use that one, Steve. I like that.
yeah. So if you use, yeah, I don't really know that much about the hairstylist one, but if you if you use the right approach here, if you have this right mindset that that this is integral, the relationship's the integral part of what you're really building then that is something you leave with your old employer, because you if you did your job, then they should have that relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know there was one other question from Jody, I think. Can we bring that up? Yeah, there we go. Let's see. So, sales cycle for many are extending into 2023. How does that impact the way reps need to engage with the customers in this longer process?
That is a good question, and I think that the macroeconomic climate, as choppy as it is right now, we are seeing more caution being entered into a sales cycle, and more of a wait and see. Let's just push this a quarter or push this a month or so, and I think it's one of the necessary evils. This isn't the first time it's happening. It may be the first time to a lot of sellers out there that it's happened to them. I watched something the other day where it was Tom Hanks was sitting around the table with a bunch of other fellow actors. I think we had Denzel Washington with us. He said he loves the phrase "this too shall pass." Right. So whenever something is going really bad and really rough, and it's the hardest thing in the world to do, but remember, this too shall pass. Conversely, when things are going really great and nothing could be more perfect, this too shall pass, right? But let's think about that in reality. We have quotas and we have 90-day sprints in which to hit those numbers that we have, right? So this has never been a better time to be a seller in a difficult market, because you get to do something that when things are peachy and humming along wonderfully, you're there and everything's great and there's not much stress or agitation between you and your potential buyers. But when there is that problem statement, you get to expand your value and saying, okay, I know I need to sell something and I know you don't really want to buy it right now. How can we uncover that? And if you've done your job and you have that seat at the table where they trust you, where they think that you're providing not just value for you so you can line your own pockets, where you go, how do we do this? You know, maybe we do a portion of it, or maybe we do all of it, and this is why waiting doesn't make sense. Or maybe you have enough wherewithal to go, we should wait. We should not do this now, and these are the reasons why. But you relate that both to your management train and your company and to the customer as well. So transparency works both ways. It's not just you being transparent to your customers. You also have to be transparent to your company as well and say, look, and I've had to put my hand up, and sometimes my hands are sweating, right? I'm going to miss, and these are the reasons I'm going to miss. I think this is the right thing to do. And remember, value and education exists in your organization as well. Say, what advice do you have for me? What should I try different? What should I do? Because again, if you're the smartest person in the room, find a different room. I love that saying, right? But if you're transparent, and sometimes waiting is the right answer, but selling in a difficult market and coming out of that with those buyers still attached to you, you're going to be very, very well set up for success when we start getting into smoother waters, because you've built that trust. You've gone through the pain and heartburn with the customer, guess what? You both share the scars. You're in a pretty good place going forward. But it's a difficult one. There's no magic button, to that question, right? There's no easy button. But selling is tough. I mean, it's the same as every company predominantly reported bumper revenues over the last 2 years, but still only 50% of the sales rep made their number, right? Isn't that stat you started the call with?
Yep.
So when there's good waters, it's not that easy as well, right? So you got to roll with it, which is not the best advice, and I apologize for that up front.
No, I was talking to a client earlier today about this exact question, and I know in the 2008 recession, you did see deals slip out, but they didn't go away. And I think that's probably, I mean, at least from what I've seen so far, that seems like the answer is that the sales cycles are longer, so you have to be able to mitigate that with your boss, I guess, but at the same time,
to some extent, it seems that firms get embedded with a company like Microsoft. That is, they become so attached that in some ways it's very difficult to leave. You're committing a lot of resources to being a customer at Microsoft, and then saying, okay, somehow we're going to switch. First of all, I don't know how many brand names you'd have to go to to switch. I mean, one of the things it seems to me for you would be, if you are a single point of contact, it's because you have direct access to a lot of resources along with indirect access to many more. We did an interview on the other side of things with the owner of an automobile dealership, who said that during COVID, he was accusing his salespeople of just being so lazy because people walked in and said, "I want that one. I want that car. It's the only one on the lot." Not much consultative, but walking in, as you said, they've already got a lot of information. You, as an organization, put a lot of information up there so that someone can search before they ever give you a call or ask for a Zoom. So in that light, what would you say is sort of the final word for tech people selling in this tech environment on getting around the analog versus digital problem?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I think, to use your analogy of the car, that's super interesting as well, because if a tech buyer comes in and goes, I want that widget, I want that service, and I'm going to run it on this platform. You, as the buyer coming in, you know why. Me as the seller, I don't know why.
Yeah.
So ask why. Why do you want that? Help educate me. Because guess what? I know a lot more ways to get there, because it is literally my job, and I work with this organization that has multiple ways to get there. Ultimately, you may be right, but we could do it in a way that's a little bit better, a little bit cheaper, a little bit more scale optimized versus what you're thinking right now, because you're telling me what you want to do now because you've done so much research, and you may have done months and months of research, and it may be phenomenal research, but that's curing what you want to do now, because you've got the action point, you've got the budget, you've got the green light, here we go. But what's that going to do here? Have you thought about that? A lot of the times where very educated buyers are coming in, they're looking at it from a very myopic, I need to do something now, because if I don't use the budget, I lose it. Or if I don't get it at this price, I'm not going to be able to get any more budget. But they don't think, what is step B? What is step C? What is step D? So down the road. And how do we help them get there? So I'm more than happy to come in and have people say, I want to do this. And I'm like, that's awesome. Explain to me why, right? So then I can bridge that gap, because again, I don't want anyone to buy something from me because I've sold it to them. I want someone to partner with me and go, you know what? I think you're going to take care of me for this, and then for that, and then for the next thing down the road, because that's when you build that partnership. And I think that bridges that gap that you guys are talking about, right? Because the two journeys become one. You're on the same road at that point now, because again, in the subscription business that we're in, the more successful you are as my buyer, the more successful I am as your seller, because as you grow, you're using more of my utility, I grow. Right. So for going out there and finding new deals and the cost of sales and all that, you guys have done lots of research on it. I'm sure there's episodes on that as well. Growing and scaling business is far more economical than going out and finding net new and starting from zero all the time. Right. We need that to feed the pipeline, but you have to scale what you have as well.
So once you've established the relationship, you can actually build share of the wallet.
Yeah, absolutely right.
So I hate to say this because I could keep this going for a few more hours, but I suspect our guests and our visitors probably wouldn't want that. So unfortunately, we're out of time today, Jon. I really thank you for joining us. Great insight there, and you survived the hot seat. So if audience, if anybody out there, if you think you have what it takes to be in the hot seat, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. And that's the In the Hot Seat episode for today. So thanks for being with us. I'm Michael Fauscette.
I'm Steve LeMay, and thank you, Jon.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for having me on.
Cool. Tune in next time for some different faces, different topics, different perspectives as we put somebody else in the hot seat and learn more about sales. Thanks.
Thanks.